Welcome to another in our series of Kehillat Israel podcasts. This is a recording of Rabbi Amy Bernstein's weekly Friday morning Torah study.
We're in Parashat Vayayshev this morning, continuing in the book of Genesis, continuing in the novella that is the Joseph story. Fully a quarter of the book of Genesis is this self-contained novella, this story of Joseph, who, interestingly enough, is not one of the patriarchs, right? So, right, it kind of stops after Yaakov. So we get this story of Yosef. We are in the third of every Torah portion, right? We're reading on a triennial cycle. We're in the third year of the cycle. So we look at the last third of every Torah portion, which puts us at chapter 39, verse 1. Just to set our scene, what happens just before this is the story of Judah and Tamar. Do you remember last year we studied Judah and Tamar? That episode is placed right before this chapter of the Joseph narrative. Remember, Ein mukdam u'meuchar b'Torah. There's no early and late in Torah exactly. And there's lots of theories about why that incident with Judah and Tamar is placed here. That's not our mission today. But if we look before that, we have Yosef, who is thrown into the pit, descends into the pit, and is sold by his brothers. Instead of being killed, he is sold.
That was Reuben's idea.
Thank you, Reuben.
Thank you, Reuben, for pointing out that it was Reuben's idea, your namesake. And he is sold into slavery, sold to Ishmaelites, who then sell him in. He goes down to Egypt. He's sold into the house of Potiphar, where God favors him and he rises to a position of serious authority in the house of Potiphar. All right, so remember when we're dealing with this story, when we're dealing with this novella, we are dealing with the images of descent, darkness, being trapped, and then ascent. Right? That is the Joseph narrative, and it happens many times in his story. The first one is the pit. He descends into the darkness, he descends into the helplessness, the chaos, the powerlessness of the pit, and ascends when his brothers pull him out, because the plan was to kill him. You leave him in a pit and he dies. That was kind of the plan. There's no blood on their hands, but essentially they're murdering him. So he's saved when they pull him out and sell him. So now we're getting the second descent. We're beginning the second descent for Yosef at chapter 39, verse 1. Someone please read.
Now Joseph was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officers, captain of the guard, an Egyptian man, purchased him from the Ishmaelites, who had brought him down. So Adonai was with Joseph. He was a man who prospered. Now that he was in the household of his Egyptian master, his master saw that Adonai was with him, and that Adonai was prospering in whatever he touched. Joseph, therefore, found favor in his sight and ministered to him. He, Potiphar, gave him...
I'm sorry?
Okay. He gave him authority over his household and placed all that he owned in his hand. From the time he gave him authority over his household and over all that he owned, Adonai blessed the house of the Egyptian on account of Joseph. The blessing of Adonai was on all that he owned in the house and in the field. He left all that was his in Joseph's hands and gave no thought to what he had other than the food he ate.
Okay. And Joseph was... Does yours go on there?
Yeah.
Okay, mine does. Joseph was
Well-built and handsome.
well-built and handsome.
He was a stud.
He was a stud. This is important for our story. All right, so let's go back, as we always do, to the beginning of that chunk. So Yosef is taken down to Egypt, right? It's always down to Egypt, right? Egypt is always a descent for the Israelites. right? It's not good. It's not good. He is taken down to Egypt. So he's been thrown down into the pit. He's come out. Now he's taken down to Egypt. And this person, who is Sris Paro, who is an officer of Paro, his name is Potiphar, right? Bought him from the Ishmaelites. And what we're told is Yud-He Vav-He et Yosef. Et is a pointing word. And so it's hard to translate into English, but God was towards Yosef. And what does that mean? Vayhi ish matzliach. And he became a very successful man. And in the house of his master, the Egyptian, the master observes, right, that everything Yosef touches goes well. In the ancient world, that means the gods smile upon you. Yes? So we might go, wait, what? Potiphar saw that God was just assume in general, if someone does extremely well in everything, it's understood by people in these kinds of ancient Near Eastern societies that the gods favor this person. Potiphar understands that. And eventually Yosef rises to the place where everything in the house is in his hand, given into his hand. So notice the literary phrases we're going to get. Hand, house, blessing, success. These are going to be repeated over and over and over again in the Joseph story. So hand, house, success, and blessing. All right. So he knows success. And again, we're told God gave him success to everything he undertook. And Potiphar takes a liking to Yosef, makes him his personal attendant, says my translation, puts him in charge of his household, placing in his hands, makes him in charge of the household, puts into his hands all that he owned. And from the time that the Egyptian put him in charge of his household and all that he owned, God blessed his house for Yosef's sake, so that the blessing of God was on everything that he owned in the house and outside, right? I'm obviously ridiculously emphasizing, but you can hear, right, the themes repeated over and over. Blessing, house, success, hands. These are important. He left all that he had in Joseph's hands, and with him there he paid attention to nothing save the food he ate. Why? Didn't have to worry about it. Why is the food he ate the only thing he worries about? Poison. Exactly. So everything material he owned, he didn't worry about. He didn't have to think about it. Yosef was in charge. Everything's groovy. You can't be too careful, however, when it comes to the best murder delivery system in the ancient world.
Maybe he was a health nut.
Maybe he was a vegan. Who knows?
Or kosher.
Or kosher. All right. And also, we have to remember that Egyptians found it loathsome to eat with Hebrews. So it would make some sense that Yosef was welcome and in control of everything except food and mealtime, because the Egyptians had a taboo about eating with Hebrews who they considered in that realm to be unclean.
How do we know that?
Because I know.
Always is there an anti-Semitic document that exists?
We have, I think what it is we have documentation from Egypt about their religious system and some of their beliefs and taboos, and one of them included eating with folks who were not Egyptian. And Ivrim, Hebrews, would have been considered one of those groups. And I know that I think I learned it partly around the end of this story when Joseph is eating. He's not eating with his brothers, right? And so I think that's where I learned it was around why wasn't he eating with the brothers? Because as an Egyptian prince, he would not have been, he would have been rather caught dead than eating at a table with Ivrim.
He's behaving as an Egyptian.
He's behaving as an Egyptian. And so I must have been in a footnote. I promise I will remember as we get there to mention it to you.
I know you mentioned anti-Semitic, but that's not unusual. There are many eating customs that various peoples have that don't permit them to eat with others. So
correct.
That exists within the Jewish community. So
right.
I don't know that it's anti-Semitic as much as it's just something that xenophobic.
Yes, that's exactly right. Because it wasn't especially Ivrim. You know, Ivrim were a caste or a class of people that would have been in the category of people with whom Egyptians won't eat. But it was not anti-Semitism. It was not uniquely Ivrim. And there's no Judaism yet, right? There's no, right? They were considered a different people, a different culture, rather than different religions back then didn't matter, right? Everyone had their religion where they came, their gods from where they came, including the Israelites. The Egyptians would have expected the Israelites to have their gods, right? It was more a cultural, and it's true. If we talk about early Christianity, right? One of the reasons kashrut was not attractive to the followers of Jesus was because it meant they could not eat with people they were trying to convert to Jesusism. Right? And so that was one of the main reasons kashrut and those kinds of observances were gotten rid of, because otherwise you really couldn't sit and eat together. Which is, by the way, like Bert said, I just want to be clear, which is what kashrut was designed to do. What the Egyptians would have done by not eating with the Hebrews, that is exactly the reason we have kashrut, was so that we weren't eating with the Canaanites. Why can't we have pig? It is no more special in the Torah than any other prohibition. Why? Probably because the Canaanites had a pig roasting festival. You want to be sure the Israelites aren't sitting at that festival eating with them? No pig ever.
And having too much fun.
And having too much fun of a certain nature was part of that, right? And so not eating those things would have been a food taboo to prevent Israelites from interacting, particularly at sacred festival times, when they might start backsliding into, right, idol worship. All right. Well, that was fun. So we get this last remark about Yosef. He was Yefeh To'ar Vifeh Mar'eh. He was comely of outside and of how you saw him. Mar'eh, it's about vision, pleasing to the eye. But it's what you see. So if you say someone's attractive, so we're going there. It's all of that. It's literally, he was beautiful to look at. He was beautiful to look at. His appearance, that's what it is, appearance. He was beautiful of appearance, right? So he's very attractive. Most likely, this is terminology that's talking about, and Peter Pitzela that we're gonna look at, talks about it in terms of charisma. He's successful, so he's not just a pretty blonde. Sorry, Carol. Sorry. He's not just a pretty face. He's seriously successful and beautiful. Those two things, particularly in a male, right? We know women who are successful are less liked often as they become more successful. But men who are successful and beautiful is serious charisma. Very serious charisma. All right. So one thing to remember about charisma, it engenders envy and desire, and it gets you thrown into pits. Right? Because at the same time that you want to be around it, it can flip pretty quickly to you just want to strip them of that coat. Right? Of what makes them special. Okay. So.
That's the next going down you're talking about.
Yeah, that's exactly what's about to happen. So 2 things. This exact phrase is used about, guess whom?
His mother.
His mother. It is written in calligraphy by a beautiful calligrapher on parchment in my office. My Hebrew name is Rachel. This is exactly what is said of Rachel. A friend gave it to me for my ordination. This thing, Rachel was Yifet Toar and Yifet Mar'ah. She was beautiful of appearance, and that it suggests more than that. It also sets up what happens next. So he is definitely his mother's son. And we have to be told this, so we know he's his mother's son. We know something way more about him now, the same way we did about Rachel. This description of Rachel goes to part of why her husband was so in love with her. Right? And, it says something about her. First of all, it's a sign of divine favor. But also, it tells you something about the power of that individual to affect others. So Rachel, her beauty in some ways was tragic, wasn't it? Mm-hmm. Because as beautiful as she was, she had to share her lover with her sister, not by choice. Her sister bore sons, the only thing Rachel wanted, and Rachel dies young, bearing her second son. So, in all ways, a tragic figure, I think. Let's wait and see what we think about Yosef. Right? Every year, just like Yaakov, I have different feelings about it. Whether or not this is a tragic story. It's a Yosef story. Alright, but what we know is that he is someone who draws the attention, as we're going to see, right, of folks based on his appearance, and I would assume based on his success as well. All right. Verse 7.
Wait, can I go back one verse?
Oh, it's going to
Now
cost you.
Joseph was well built and handsome, and after a time, his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph and said, "Lie with me." But he refused. He said to his master's wife, "Look, with me here, my master gives no thought to anything in this house, and all that he owns he has placed in my hands. He wields no more authority in this house than I, and he has withheld nothing from me except yourself, since you are his wife. How then could I do this most wicked thing and sin before God?" And much as she coaxed Joseph day after day, he did not yield to her request to lie beside her, to be with her.
Okay, so Yosef, this is very blunt. Shichva imi is very blunt. Lishkov is the same word used when Dinah has her encounter. Are
you saying it's cruder than lying
Thank
with
you.
me?
It is crude. It is sexual, not necessarily in a good way. Right? So in when I was growing up, if you wanted to be crude about it, she got laid. Mm-hmm. He laid her. Mm-hmm. Right? So that's exactly this word. Lishkov, to lie. Right? So, and it's a verb. Right? Lie with me. It sounds even nice in the English, but it's not, right? I want to lay you. So lay down. It's an order. It's crass and crude. There's no pretense here that she needs to, in any way, treat him as a human being. Or, have conversation and go out for cocktails. First of all, she's not supposed to do this. This is a crime. Right? She could be killed for this. So it's bold, and it's crass, and it says something also about Yosef's station. That she orders him to lie with her.
isn't that also against her husband? Not just that she's doing adultery, but that the husband has put Joseph in a particular status.
Yes.
And she is saying, no, you're just a common slave.
Yes. Even if you have control of all of this, I am mistress of this house. Don't you start thinking, Mr. Busy, right, that you are anything other than my property to do with as I please. Right? Okay. So, what does Yosef answer? How could I possibly betray the trust of my master, who's put all of his household into my hands? How could I do that? And what do we have added here that's a little new?
And sin against God.
And how could I sin against God? This is new. This is not the Yosef we've seen earlier. This is new.
But, I guess this is a question of translation, because I can't go back. So in the Green Book, it says, and thus sin against God. As if the question is the sinning against God the act of having sex with the wife of his master, or is it just wrong by itself, or is it wrong because of his station with the master?
If we go to
the Hebrew,
if we go to ancient Near Eastern law, if she's married, it's already against the law. She's off limits.
Right.
He's already committing a crime.
Right. So
against Potiphar.
But that's not a sin against God, though. I mean, there are no commandments.
It will be.
Later in the show.
There's no future.
But the Ten Commandments haven't happened yet. Is that one of the Noahide laws? It's not one of them.
I don't. Probably, but remember, we always have to remember right, Reuben? Real history, lived history, and Torah history. So even though they didn't receive Torah yet, for the rabbis, they already knew Torah. These people already knew Torah. He knew that was a sin. He doesn't have to be at Sinai to know that sleeping with Potiphar's wife is a chet before Yud Hey Vav Hey. And this is written by people who have had Torah for a long time.
Well, you mentioned before how the theme of hands and house, etc., and blessing. So this is related to the blessing part of the four things that you talked about.
Tell me.
Well, blessing comes from God, presumably, and now he's talking about God. So
okay, so like not only would it be wrong because you're off limits and you're the wife of my master, but the reason I have this relationship with my master is because I have been blessed.
By God.
And I would be betraying that source of blessing by doing this, and betrayal in that language is sin. Okay, I'm sold.
Is it significant that Yud Hey Vav Hey is not the Hebrew word used here, but Lelohim?
You tell me.
I'm asking the rabbis. I mean,
what do you think? Do you think it's important
Elohim,
that this is the plural name for God?
Well, not only that, but it can also mean wider than Yud Hey Vav Hey. If such a thing exists.
Well, it would probably be a name that she could relate to. She won't be able to relate to Adonai, because Adonai is kind of like a Hebrew specific name. Whereas Elohim is just, she runs into a slave from some other community, and they've got an Elohim, and this Hebrew has an Elohim, and so.
Couldn't you also translate this before the gods?
Yes.
Yeah, which is similar, something that she can relate to.
But we never do.
Well, it doesn't seem to matter to her, right? So in a way, this is if that's the case, on some level, isn't he, even if it were Yud Hey Vav Hey, isn't he in some way saying something insulting to her? I understand this to be sinful.
What's your problem?
Right? But what are your standards that you don't? Right? You're a married woman. It should be a sin, even in her religion. It should be considered an affront to some God that she is violating her marriage situation. Yes? So he's insulting her subtly. Or maybe not so subtly.
It seems like almost as much or maybe a worse violation that she would then turn around and implicate him for doing what he didn't do.
Why is it worse because of that?
Well, because she's now not just being self-indulgent, but she's actually profoundly affecting somebody else's life to the negative. I mean, it turns out okay, but at that moment, you know.
Well, there's a reason it turns out right. So I mean, I kind of want to hold. I believe. I don't know that it makes it worse. I think it may even motivate her more. I've just told you, as the mistress of the house, to do something. And you not only tell me what I'm suggesting is unethical, immoral, as regards your husband, but also before the gods, it's a sin. That is motivating for her to betray him.
Who do you think you are?
So angry.
Right, he's insulted her twice. She's been spurned. He's told her no. He's disobeyed her command. He's acting as her equal. He's reminding her she's betraying her husband and asking him to betray her husband and that it's a sin. That's a lot of motivation, isn't it?
And he says you're unattractive.
And by implication, Sheldon is saying, you are not beautiful enough or desirable enough to have me overcome all of those reluctances to sleep with you. Right. Absolutely right.
I just came up with that. I kept looking for it.
And
what if she says something that would have negated everything else?
Right.
And it also says she does this day after day.
I was just getting there. Verse 10 says it doesn't happen just once.
Day after day.
Day after day, she tries to entice him. So he disobeyed her order.
Every day?
Every day. But then it starts to be something else, doesn't it? Why do you keep ordering a slave to do something that he's not? You call your husband and say, he's defied me. Obviously, she can't do that in this case. But you'd either quit or try to get rid of the slave.
It's an escalation.
But it's seduction, right? It's not that. She wants him. She wants him really badly. And it may not just be sexual, obviously. She wants, possibly, right, the power, control of being able to get what she wants from him. But she wants this. Again, fuel for what happens.
What
All
about,
right.
What about what you were saying earlier? Is someone like this engenders jealousy and envy and acting against it. And here he was, in some ways, more powerful than she. Because he controlled everything but that portion of the household. Was she reacting to that?
I have to believe it's part of it.
Yeah.
He's risen meteorically in the house. And I have to believe there's some part of her that's like, let's just be clear.
Yeah.
Right? That he has the ear of her husband. They're business partners. They're spending all their time together. And he's beautiful. Like I have to believe, yes, some act of wanting to put him
down
in his place. Yes?
So, in ancient times, in that household, would she have taken a powerful role with her husband that Joseph has usurped?
So, partly it would depend on the relationship. They certainly had different roles. I have to believe that him rising so fast and being a foreigner and lots of other things probably upset the order of what was expected. It's unusual. enough that it charges this whole situation. This is not just a normal steward that's hired.
But we're really powerful. Would they just, in a powerful household, would they say, hey, I like you, let's fuck? I mean, sorry.
Yes. That presumably they could. She's putting herself at great risk because it's a crime. But presumably she had some authority, over slaves, but there would have been a unique relationship between the master of the house and his steward. That if you watch Downton Abbey, the lady of the house would never presume to go to the Lord's steward and mess with anything between them.
But she'd go to the chauffeur.
But she'd go to the chauffeur. Right? So, do you know what I mean? It's an interesting question you're raising, which I think is here, that it's a tangled set of loyalties and relationships and power dynamics, which is Joseph's whole story. The tangling and crisscrossing of expectations about power and reversals of role, right? This is the whole story. And I think we could take your question and map out the whole arc of this story just talking about power. Who has it, who doesn't, who's supposed to, but loses it, who shouldn't have it, but gets it, right? And it's complicated. But I think there's definitely a special relationship between Potiphar and Yosef in the house that she is violating.
Of all the major players here, she has no name.
Because she doesn't matter.
She's away.
She's not
all the other major players in these stories have names.
She's not a major player. She's an agent.
Well, maybe she thinks she is.
She thinks she is, maybe. She's an agent of what happens next to Yosef.
Right.
And her only thing that matters about her is that she's Eshet Potiphar. She is Mrs. Potiphar. That is all that matters.
Could she have wanted his child? He's a beautiful guy. She has doesn't say they have any children. Maybe that was part of it.
She wants him as a stud. It's possible.
We don't know how old Mrs. Potiphar is. She could be an old woman. We
have no idea. I'm glad you said, or she could be 50. Thank you.
An old woman or 15.
Oh, I thought you said or 50. I was like, thank you for that disjunctive.
Or she could be a young woman of 50. Either one.
So,
or 70.
So this could be a motivating factor for sure. She's still not allowed to do it.
Right.
You know, she's still not allowed. Her sexuality belongs to her husband. I mean, to what extent in ancient Egypt? I don't know, but I can't imagine it would have been so different from the ancient Near East. Okay, let's move on. How does this happen? All right, let's go to 11.
On one such day, when he came into the house to do his work, and not one of the people of the household was there in the house.
Dun, 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 dun.
She took hold of him by his garment, saying, "Lie with me." He left his garment in her hand, fled, and ran outside. When she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and fled outside, she summoned her household servants and spoke to them, saying, "See, he brought us a Hebrew man to toy with us. He came to me to lie with me, and I cried out in a loud voice. When he heard me raise my voice and cry out, he left his garment with me and fled and ran outside. And she kept his garment with her until his master came home. She spoke to him in this manner, saying, The Hebrew slave whom you brought to us came to me to toy with me. But when I raised my voice and cried out, he left his garment near me and fled and ran outside."
All right, so let's look at this incident. So one day, he comes into the house to do his business. She sees that nobody's around. It is her opportunity. She catches hold of him by bigdo. Bigdo biyada. His beged is in her hands. All right, again, we've got hands, right? We're going to see it through the rest of the story. His beged is in her hands. Beged implies clothing. It does not imply cloak. Okay? That's a distinction that's important. This is not, she grabs him and he can come out of it. This is his clothes. Right? His beged is in her hand. And what does she say at that point?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Right? She grabs his beged and says, Shichva imi. Lie with me.
What does she mean by that?
Are you scared?
I fell for it for 30 seconds, Ruben.
Blanche will explain it to him later.
All right. Vayazov bigdo biyada, right? But he left his garment in her hand. So he comes out, she's got him. How can he get away? Like, he's gotta come out of his clothes that are now left in her hand, and he runs outside. All right, now, what state is he in when he runs outside?
Somewhat naked.
Somewhat naked. He is extremely vulnerable at this moment. He's coming out of the master's residence, half naked. He's already in danger. It's already over. Let's put it that way. The minute he leaves his clothing in her hands and runs outside, it's over. It could also be over, however, for Mrs. Potiphar, who gets that right away. She's not stupid. So now she knows he's gone outside half naked. She's holding his clothes, right? What does she do immediately? She screams for her servants. And what does she say to them? Look what?
Look at the garment?
Right? She says, Ru'u, see. Hevilanu ish ivri litzachek banu. He brought us an ivri man. Litzachek banu. What do we know about this word litzachek? To play with us. All right.
Related to
of course.
And the playing.
Of course. Yitzchak with Rivka, Yitzchak and Yishmael. We know this word, litzachek, to play, to dally with us. What is she saying?
She's blaming her husband, master of the house. What my awful husband, idiot guy, has done.
To whom?
Us.
Well, how's it to us?
Because he brought the slave there.
To what? Who's us?
She and her servants, maybe.
She and her servants, who would have been female. For this to have any weight, it must be, she's talking about other female. The us is her and other female slaves. He brought this animal. Because we know about those Hebrews, right? Think about African American slaves and what was said about them. Same thing. They are virile, they are beautiful and desirable. But what happens if a white woman, right, in any way, right, it flips quickly into that desirability and beauty and virile strength is animal-like. That's exactly what's happening here. She says he brought that Negro slave in here to toy with us, because we know that's what they do. You know that's what they do. You know how they are, right? It's exactly what's happening here. So what has she just done? She's shifted the blame to her husband, but she has to be convincing about it. So what is she trying to do? She's trying to rally the other slaves and the household to support her position. Not just me.
He would have
come after you next. He started here. You think that's where it was going to end? You were next.
It's like they're here to, rape our daughters.
Exactly. And thank God I stopped him by screaming. I have saved us all. It's her only play. She's smart. It's her only play here. It's also a risk.
Nerve too. It's not just smart, but it takes nerve to pull.
Oh, right? Well, serious nerve.
Nerve or fear?
Well, this was going on.
Both, probably. Nerve and fear, right? So when he heard me screaming, right, I prevented it. I stopped it, right? He left his garment with me and got away and fled outside. David?
It's hard to believe that she would have cared about the thoughts of the other slaves, in the sense they don't matter. They're her property as well. She's just setting the scene for when her husband comes home. I think to give authenticity.
Sure.
She's about to do it.
But the spin that she puts on it assures some level of support in the house for her version. Rather than the slaves going, look, Potiphar, I hate to be the one to break this to you, but this is not the first guy we've seen running out of here half naked. She buys their loyalty and, has them buy into her version of the events by saying, I saved us all.
To me, this feels more like a power more than a sexual thing. It was a power thing between her and Joseph. And she ultimately got spurned and just said, I'm going to do him in.
Right.
Beyond the sexual.
Let's be clear, people.
Yeah.
There is never a separation of sex and power. There is no such thing. There is no such thing as sex without power. Play. Ever. We choose to give, and when we're in love and we love the other person, we choose to give over our power. But any situation like this is always and only about power. Sex is simply the vehicle. Think rape, think office place harassment, which is what this is, right? Why is it called harassment? Because you really don't have a choice, even if you agree, because there's too many power dynamics at play. That's why it's illegal. All right. The master comes home. She's still got Joseph's garment because he could go to Potiphar himself. She's got to have evidence. She told him the same story. The Hebrew slave whom you brought into our house came with me to dally with me, but when I screamed at the top of my voice, he left his garment and fled outside. This is echoing who saying what to whom? That man you brought to me has tried to have something not nice go down here. Who? Where do we see this? Monica Lewinsky. Okay, I was thinking more along the lines of Adam and Eve, but okay. Monica Lewinsky. She has the dress.
The woman
Eve blaming the serpent, absolutely.
Not only Eve and the serpent.
Adam blaming Eve.
Adam says to God, this woman that you brought to me, she told me to eat it. It's exactly what's here, right? It's a classic move in Torah, right? Moshe to God, this people that you brought out of Egypt, right? Really? It's your fault, essentially. Classic move. Assigning blame. Classic move.
Avoiding responsibility.
Classic move. All right. So, when Potiphar hears the story that his wife told him, thus and so did your slave do to me, he was, understandably, livid. Right? So Joseph's master had him put in prison where the king's prisoners were confined. But even while he was there in prison, God was with Joseph and extended kindness to him and disposed the chief jailer favorably toward him. The chief jailer put in Joseph's charge all the prisoners who were in that prison. And
charisma.
And he was the one to carry out everything that was done there. The chief jailer did not supervise anything that was in Joseph's charge because God was with him, and whatever he did, God made successful. So another incident of Joseph descending once again. Right? He's risen in the house of Potiphar, and of course descends now into the Beit Sohar, the
after losing his garment.
After losing his garment again. So Bert brings us to another important point. Joseph is stripped of his garment again. Once by his brothers, now by someone else who has power in his household where he's living, who strips him again. His coat that he was stripped of when he was thrown into the pit, what happened to it?
Gets dipped in blood and returned to his death.
Gets dipped in blood and shown to his father to deceive his father into believing he's dead. He's stripped of his beged here in order for what?
For her to deceive her husband.
For her to deceive her husband into thinking something about Joseph. This is the theme.
But isn't it also that he is he's such an important figure because he keeps the layers keep coming off, and when you take off the layers, the only thing that exposed is the truth.
So Amy is bringing us to the point. What's happening ultimately is Joseph keeps being stripped of identities because eventually he's got to find out or discover, or we discover with him, who's underneath all of that. And that is what we see 2 weeks from now when he meets his brothers. So let's hold that in mind because I know you'll be here.
But isn't it also like when Moses goes out and he gets stripped also, all his clothes come off in the desert, like he's from the Pharaoh's house, and then they talk about him having all this embellishment and all these crap, and then he's in the desert and has none of that on. Isn't that when you really accept God? Isn't maybe God prepping him?
So what I would do is I would map out how is clothing symbolic of either covering over, how is it symbolic of status, how is it symbolic of a change in status, right? We could do a whole thesis, and it's been done actually. There is one done by Dr. Lori Lefkowitz, who did a whole thing about how do the garments in Torah play into masks and identities, and what does that mean for us with all of our identities, and what does the stripping away mean? I don't know that Yosef ever gets there. So I'm not ready to say yes, because I don't know that he gets there. If I read it tragically, he never gets there. He's stuck in the clothes of the vizier of Egypt. He doesn't get to be, who is Yosef? Is he even, you know what I mean? Like, what is he? Who is he? Okay. So, but it's a great way for us to look at how Torah uses that, clothing and all those symbols of station and the loss of them. It is all over this story. And with Tamar, right? So that's when I talked about garments and hiding and about Tamar. Okay. Who's inserted in the middle of this narrative? All right. Go to page 212 on your handout. Right? All right. Starting at the very top, second sentence. He is stripped. This is Peter Pitzela, our father's wells. This is the man who teaches bibliodrama. He takes the scene from Torah and has people act it out, and then starts interviewing the characters. The group interviews the characters and busts the text wide open by saying, Joseph, stop. What are you feeling right now? What are you thinking? Right? So you actually enter the scene and you enter the text, and it's a very powerful way to study Torah and have a group experience that is people often leave in tears, like it's very powerful. So he's talking about this story and how he's done it in bibliodrama and, some of the themes that have emerged. So he is stripped not merely of his cloak of favoritism, but of all his illusions as well. This is when he's thrown into the pit. This is the pit, the dry well, the depths. What do we know about a well? What does a well symbolize? Only if he's thrown into a pit. It's not just a pit, it's a dry well. He's thrown into the symbol of life that is dry. It's death. This is a descent into the darkness. This is Persephone descending. This is winter. This is death. This is rebirth. All right? All of those metaphors are absolutely at work here. That's what the story is about. This is the pit, the dry well, the depths. And this is not the last time he will know this place. Drop down to the third paragraph. But his fortunes turn. Joseph the slave is elevated to the position of major domo in the house of Potiphar, an Egyptian dignitary. Drop to the end of that paragraph. Joseph is immediately stripped of another cloak. This time, his suit of office, thrown into prison and abandoned. Next paragraph. A second time we hear how he prospers. God was with Joseph, we read, and brought him to favor in the eyes of the prison warden. Again, Joseph rises from the depths and becomes second in command. Next paragraph. Then a third time, this pattern of rise and fall is repeated. In prison, Joseph befriends two inmates. We know what happens. He interprets dreams for them. They're supposed to, when the one that gets out and is going to live, he's supposed to do what? That's in our story. We didn't read it, but
tell Pharaoh.
He's supposed to tell Pharaoh about Joseph, that there's this great dream interpreter, right? Which is a big deal in Egypt. What happens when the guy gets out? The text tells us he forgets Joseph, and he is further abandoned. All right, we're going to stop there and turn our paper over to page 274. This is Aviva Zorenberg, her book, The Beginnings of Desire, her book on Genesis, which we've studied lots before because it's one of the most masterful things ever created. We're going to drop down to the paragraph that starts the problems, yes? So Peter Pitzela just told us about this rise, descent, rise, descent, rise, descent, and the last abandonment is Joseph is forgotten. The problems of remembering and forgetting, says Zorenberg, informed the whole narrative. The butler, in spite of Joseph's pleas, does not remember to mention him to Pharaoh. He did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. But this failure signals a moment when he does, in fact, remember certain aspects of Joseph in a context where such reconstructions have become essential to Pharaoh and indeed to the whole country. Right? So he forgets Joseph until Pharaoh has a need that could affect the whole country. Then he remembers an aspect of Joseph. Dream interpretation. Right. That guy, right, is a good dream interpreter. His memory is fragmentary, right? That's all he remembers, the dream interpreter. But reassembles a Joseph who is both non-threatening and a talented interpreter, the clever fool motif. Similarly, Joseph has disappeared down a pit into the deathly oblivion of which the Talmud says, this is a legal treatise, if one fell into a pit full of snakes and scorpions, we bear witness, meaning that person is presumed dead. So his wife, could go marry someone else. Just being thrown into the pit and being left there, according to the Talmud, you're legally dead. He has the status of a dead person. He is lost to memory, his own as well as his family's conscious memory. Thomas Mann describes his dismemberment as, quote, cutting into very little pieces his trust, his whole notion of the world. A wholeness and intuitive ordering of experience is disrupted forever. So let's think about that for a minute.
It's almost as if throughout the entire story, even when he sort of at the end makes it to the top, Joseph has no agency ever. He's acted upon by his brothers. He is sold into slavery. He's always, even when he rises to a high position in Potiphar's household, he's playing a role. He's still a Hebrew slave playing a role. He gets thrown into prison again. He interprets dreams. He gets forgotten.
Right.
He can never do anything for himself. He's always brought out and made to play a role. And he never sort of like emerges from that cycle.
Yeah, but the teaching point here must have been of whoever wrote this, but God was on his side.
So both are true, right? Because all of us are acted upon none of us control ultimately what happens. We just don't. We emerge to play another role. Mother, widow, sister. We don't choose so many of the roles we wind up playing or what happens to us. What we choose is a perspective about them that either affirms or doesn't the idea that there is meaning. That there is, in your words, God was with him.
That's the way.
Sarah?
In terms of agency, isn't Joseph the one who has the foresight to see that the Egyptians put away food for a time of hunger, and then he saves his family by using some of that?
Right.
So that's agency.
Well, except that, perhaps, but he's also kind of the clever intern coming up with a great solution for his boss.
And his life hangs in the balance. If he doesn't interpret that dream, if he isn't valuable to Pharaoh, he's dispensable. He's disposable, right? So it's by means of his skill that he is relevant or valuable to Pharaoh. Does that say anything about Joseph wanting to be a dream interpreter, right? So, but again, I think this is life. It's all a mix, isn't it? All right, so I want to go to 275 quickly. I want you to go home and read the paragraph before this. It took me a long time to chew it through, to really digest it. So I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. It's brilliant that she pulls this in here. Walter Benjamin. She pulls Walter Benjamin in here. But go to the paragraph, the weaving, right? The weaving work of forgetting that Benjamin, this author that wrote the paragraph before, so strikingly describes in this passage is the experience of Joseph as he involuntarily reassembles fragments of his repressed past. He involves his brothers in his reconstruction of the past, imprisoning Simeon as he was imprisoned, insisting on Benjamin's being brought down to Egypt as he was brought down. He weeps 3 times in the course of a protracted charade in which the past returns to him in terror and pity. And as he experiences the new reweavings from the loom of forgetting, he subjects his brothers too to the radical anxiety of loss and recollection. So I want you to spend some time with that paragraph at home, because what she's talking about is the warp and woof of forgetting and remembering. And that those two, the warp and woof, are the fabric of life, of his life, of our identities. And he's forgetting some things, but then he puts them together. He reenacts it all with his family. All the things he's trying to escape and forget and move away from and leave behind. He reenacts it all on his family. Don't we? Don't we? I'm over that. Really? Ask your daughter if you're so over what happened to you when you, right? So, because we act it out again in some other ways. It may be to try to do it better than what was done to us, but in so many ways, maybe.
That this is a very profound things to say about the Holocaust and Holocaust survivors, but also the Jewish people as a whole after the Holocaust, about trying to reconstruct from fragments of memory where we came from in Europe and Poland and Ukraine, and just hit me that this, and that we're still in the process of doing it.
And we say we're over it, are we? Go talk to us about something that terrifies us, like Israel. We can't even have a rational conversation about Israel. Why? Because we're still dealing with the terror of Auschwitz. That's why.
And also the broken memory of the past.
Absolutely. We're a people who constantly is dealing with the fragments of memory and destruction and fragmentation and destruction and reconstruction and destruction. And that's who we are. That's one of the things we offer the world. We're still here. There's 30 of you in this room. We're still here. That is one of the things I think we offer that is profound to the world.
Is that the takeaway here? I'm trying to think about what someone said to me, what did you learn today?
So let's.
Is he a dupe? Is he clever?
Turn your page over, because I'm not going to leave you, God forbid, hanging. Good question, David. I'm not going to just leave you. To page 213. See, I have my little numbers in what order we're supposed to read these things, okay? In my number 4, go to the middle of the first paragraph on 213, Peter Pitzula. He's talking about his bibliodrama groups, where they've studied these, texts by acting them out and going deep. In our groups, we have sought to discover what story he tells himself by which to maintain his poise and spirit among his disasters. What does he do to stave off despair? No God has ever addressed him, made a covenant with him, or promised him a redeeming future. Whatever got our patriarchs through, our matriarchs through, doesn't happen for Joseph. Right? We went to this tearing away of memory, of fragmentation, but he's in the pit. He rises up. He's in the pit. He rises up. What gets him through? He's never been told, you're going to have progeny like the stars of the heaven. I'm going to give you this land. He's never been told that. He's been told nothing about a redeeming future. What gets him through? No revelation upholds him, nor can he summon an angel to grapple with him and give him his name. His wounds are inward and concealed. He lacks a blessing. So far, his dreams have led him to a dungeon. Next paragraph. In the end, we see him as a man who remembers his dreams and puts his trust in them. He finds some center deep within his bewilderment, and there he finds a kind of peace. Like Joseph, we reach for what sustains us through our various imprisonments, what restores us from our derelictions. We cannot name it precisely, but we share the experience of it in our group. His Torah study group, our Torah study group. We cannot name it precisely, but we share the experience of it in this group. May we be, this Shabbat, Vayayshev, may we be strengthened in our commitment to being present for one another as we help locate for one another the meaning, the hope, the essence at the center of our own imprisonments and derelictions. Shabbat Shalom.
You've been listening to Rabbi Amy Bernstein's Friday morning Torah study from Kehillat Israel in Pacific Palisades, California. For more information, go to our website, www.ourki.org.